Module 5, we're going to talk about pleasure. Why is it important to talk about pleasure? What is an orgasm? How do people experience orgasms? And what is masturbation? This is one of those topics that have the most myths and misconceptions. And because there's a lot of shame and stigma around these topics, people don't tend to talk about them very openly. In this masterclass, we're going to touch upon two main topics. One is pleasure, thinking about anatomy in the context of pleasure, how pleasure works, and the other is sexual health. How do you prevent some of the risks and consequences that might come with sex? You've probably heard of ejaculation in the context of orgasm, but those are two separate things in a lot of cases. So let's start there. Let's do a deep dive into what is an orgasm. An orgasm is inherently really difficult to define. There are scientists who've tried to coin terminology about this, but because it is such a subjective experience and looks so different depending on what your anatomy is like, depending on where you are in your menstrual cycle, depending on your mood, all sorts of different things, the way an individual experiences orgasm can vary a lot. And so when I say the word orgasm, I'm often referring to, just very broadly speaking, literally, this is the definition that exists. It is a feeling of release. Now, what that release is usually a release of tension of some type, typically referred to as sexual tension, but it could be a feeling of physical tension also that is just released at the end, and that event of the release is called the orgasm. Now, a lot of people find that this is the peak point of their pleasure. It'll often be also referred to as the climax. But as we think a little bit deeper, for a lot of people, that climax is not one event. So if I had to draw a graph, for example, for people with penises, typically, biologically speaking, not anything else, they say that there's like arousal that happens, it goes up this way, it peaks, and then it dips after that. But for people with vulvas, for example, if you have a clitoris, and that binary is also quite arbitrary, that experience could look like a peak, but it could also look like a plateau. It could also look like other types of shapes of how someone experiences that release. And so that release may be a peak, it may be a climax, but it's not always a climax. Now, you're probably like, wait, but what about the ejaculation thing? Yes. So, good point, coming to that. So, the ejaculation thing is something that does happen for some people, especially if you have a penis. You might experience ejaculation when you experience this feeling of release. So, it could look like you're feeling arousal, that feeling of arousal is increasing, and then once it ends, it releases, the penis releases ejaculate or semen, right? But for people, that's not always the case, and people with penises can also experience orgasm without ejaculating. They can also experience multiple orgasms, which is something that's very little talked about. And then for people with vulvas, ejaculation is completely optional and kind of works in a different way. So yes, people with vulvas can also release fluids when they're experiencing pleasure. One of the fluids they release is just a lubricant. People with vulvas will have a fluid that just is a general wetness that comes along with, could be physical stimulation, could be sexual arousal, but could also be honestly the time of the month or just the state of the vagina in general, the vaginal canal specifically, or the front hole. And so as we think about the fluids that a front hole might release, we want to also think about there is a phenomena which is in popular culture called squirting. Now, squirting is this release of a whitish, clearish fluid and could be related to orgasm, but is not always related to orgasm. And for some people, squirting happens, for some people it doesn't happen, for some people it always happens when they orgasm, for some people it can happen even just kind of randomly, like during their sexual experience they could be squirting and then a little bit later they orgasm afterwards as a different event altogether. And so squirting is something that I think gets a lot of attention, particularly in pornography, because it is a display. It is somewhat performative in pornography, but in reality could be just another phenomena that occurs in people's bodies. And so as we think about all these various fluids that are released by the body, the one key thing to remember, I think, is that the orgasm is none of these fluids. And it might coincide with those releases, but at the end of the day, the orgasm is something that is happening primarily in the brain. And so it is your brain that experiences the arousal, and as well as the dips, as well as the hormones that are released as a result of the brain sending signals to parts of your body. And the reason why orgasm is an important part of some people's sexual experiences is because orgasms can come with many different benefits, such as the hormones that are released, like happy hormones like dopamine and oxytocin, which help people feel like they are bonding with someone else, or they could help people feel happy and sleepy and want to take a nap after that. And some people look at that as a negative side effect of an orgasm, but some people use it to their advantage and use it as a way to fall asleep. And so as we think about orgasms, I think there's different things to consider in terms of, and people have many different paths as to how they might reach this release of tension. But the important thing to remember is that it looks very different for different people. As a sex educator, the question I get asked the most about is about masturbation. Everyone asks me, what are the negative side effects of masturbation? Will I lose muscle mass? Will I grow hair on my body, grow hair on my palms? Will I not be able to function well in bed if I masturbate too much? I get all sorts of questions about masturbation because I think as a society we have a lot of stigma around masturbation. And I've just said masturbation 12 times, but what do we mean when we say masturbation? Masturbation refers to the act of self-pleasure. So doing any behaviors or stimulation or engaging, and it's usually sexual but doesn't always have to be genital oriented. So masturbation refers to any activity that is self-pleasure oriented. And so that could look like stimulating your genitals, touching your penis, touching your clitoris, inserting things into your vaginal opening or front hole. But it can also look like so much else. It can also look like rubbing other parts of your body, touching other parts of your body, using things like a massager or a toy, something like that. And what masturbation looks like can look very different from person to person. But before that, I want to quickly address all of these misconceptions, right? So the first thing to remember is there are no negative side effects to masturbation. In fact, there's some research to show that there are some positive side effects of masturbation. It can make your mood better, it can help you sleep better, it can also help you learn about your body and learn about your pleasure, learn about what feels good to you, what doesn't feel good to you, how your anatomy feels and functions. I think a lot of the fears around masturbation also just come from this fear of doing it too much. And there's a lot of rhetoric out there about masturbation addiction, especially in the context of porn addiction. But the reality is that a lot of that conversation is rooted in sexual shame. And a lot of that conversation is rooted in this idea that sex itself is wrong. However, sex is not necessarily wrong. I think that different people have different ways of relating to it, but that doesn't mean it's inherently something wrong to do. And similarly, masturbation is also you exploring your relationship with your own body. The only time it becomes a problem or too much is if someone is, and this is true of anything, not just of masturbation, the only time it's too much is if it's coming in the way of other aspects of your life. So if it's coming in the way of your work, your studies, your social life, your relationship, like you're feeling compulsive about it in a way that you're not able to control how much you want to do it, then it's time for a conversation with a therapist. And or if you feel like it's affecting your mood adversely, then it's time for a conversation with a professional who can guide you through that, just like it is true of any other type of addiction. And so as you think about masturbation, I think there's a few things to remember. Firstly, it's not wrong. There are some benefits. There's no big negative side effect that's going to be wrong for you. The second thing you need to remember is that if it's not working out for you, and this tends to happen to some people where they just are physically stimulating their body but not necessarily in the mood for it. So what I encourage you to do is think about masturbation as a practice. Think about ways in which you can get in that mood, and depending on what excites you and how you experience that excitement, you can think about either playing some nice music, going for a hot shower, reading erotica, listening to audio pornography, watching pornography, whatever it might be. You can think of different ways in which you can get into the mindset that helps you be more present in your body as you experience touch and enjoy your own body.